master's in innovation design engineering in London, but I've been dabbling in iOS stuff for about 6 years now. And even though I'm from Slovenia, which is right next door to Italy, this is actually my first time at Pragma conference, so it feels really great sharing this experience with all of you so close to home. So about 4.5 years ago, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, the answer would definitely have been iOS developer. And I was well on my way. It was 2015, and I just graduated with a bachelor's degree in computer science from Grinnell College in Iowa. And I was about to meet this guy in June. I also had a job lined up to work on the mobile app for a company called Rent a Runway in New York City. And I couldn't wait to get started. But a lot has happened since then. I went from being this diehard mobile app fangirl to feeling quite disillusioned by creating and using mobile technologies in general. I started to realize how dependent on my phone I was becoming. And since I now had a backstage view into knowing how apps used by millions of people get made, it became quite clear to me that this dependence didn't just happen entirely on its own, but rather as a byproduct of questionable data-driven decisions aimed at monetizing user attention. But before you run out of this room, I'm not here to deliver a passionate rant about how mobile is ruining our lives. There are lots of people doing that already, and I'm here instead to share my perspective on mobile development, how it started, how it changed, and how it's evolved over the years. And how I've ultimately realized that mobile development is an incredible way to solve problems, as long as your decisions are driven by empowering rather than overpowering your users. All right, so first I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I fell in love with mobile apps. It all started way back around the year 2000 in Slovenia when I got a stable internet connection and discovered Neopets. And for those of you who don't know it, Neopets is this virtual pet website, but the pets themselves don't actually matter. Everything else does, like having lots of Neopoints or trophies or avatars. But the one thing that can really set you apart from all the other players is having a killer user lookup page. And thankfully, our friends at Neopets were kind enough to let us tweak it through like plain text, HTML, and CSS. And creating user lookups was this whole new world. I got into graphics with CorelDRAW and Photoshop to make it look good, and then I got into coding to make it work and be interactive. And this was the first time I was making something, and I knew exactly how it worked, and I could control exactly how it looked and how people used it. And that was just mind-blowing to me. You could be really nice and make them very simple for people to use, like this one. Or you can make it very hard, like sticking the entire lookup into this tiny box and really make people struggle. And at that point, I was starting to get this fuzzy idea of the importance of making things usable and accessible, which especially became apparent after I got my first ever user feedback, which was a Neo mail from another player saying that this really sucked. So I made sure never to do it again. So these were my humble beginnings in my interest in UX and interaction design. So then in college, I kind of naturally gravitated towards computer science, especially because in the intro course, we learned to script images like these with Scheme. And if you don't know Scheme, it's this functional programming language based on minimalism, simplicity, and extendability, which I really didn't like back then. But seeing that Swift is built on very similar principles, I now really appreciate. I also appreciated the images that I could create, which were the biggest reason that kept me going in that class. It was really great to see how complicated programming concepts like recursion could manifest in something as beautiful as these cool fractal images. Then in 2012, an interesting opportunity came along. A group of guys from the CS department were making a mobile app for the school cafeteria, so I jumped at the chance to join in. I was already a huge Apple fangirl, so the idea of being able to make an app for the iPhone sounded fantastic. Luckily for me, Arc and Interface Builder were both already part of Xcode at that point, which significantly lowered the barriers to entry. and sparked an instant connection. So from the moment I placed my first UI button on a view controller and control dragged it to hook it up to a function that changed the background color on touch-up inside and ran that app on a real phone, I was hooked. I could play with something I made with code in the real world. Not only that, but the app we ended up building was actually useful for other people. Using the web to check the menu was really terrible. It was difficult to find. You could only use it with Flash, and filtering for your preferences was an absolute nightmare. The app we created was much more accessible, usable, useful, and fun. It let people see nutritional info with the tap of a button, filter food based on dietary restrictions, and even favorite items and get notified on days they'd be available. And so this simple little dining hall app called Glicious became a huge success. It was used by over 50% of the campus. And it was a major time saver for college students because it helped them plan their meals in advance. And it was a great tool to procrastinate with instead of writing that term paper. So not only did it help students, it helped professors as well. They could now tell if they had to bring in their own lunch or, go to the cafeteria to get some. And last but not least, it also helped parents have the peace of mind that their child had access to quality food. It was a really interesting crash course in understanding how different sets of people could use your app for different purposes, even ones that you didn't predict for or explicitly design for. And for me, it really underlined the importance of understanding your user base, their use cases, and making decisions driven by helping them reach their goals. So this love affair with mobile apps began, and we started this whole new student group called Greenell App Dev that still exists to this day. And I spent the next 3 years working on a couple of different iOS apps across development and design. I ran the group until 2015, and during that time, we took every opportunity to find a new app to make, a new problem to solve, a way to make things more fun and easier to use. So we had a school newspaper app, we had an app for events, we had one for the campus directory, and even a game. We didn't really do extensive research whether people actually wanted these apps. We just made them because we could. Because at that time, everything needed an app, right? Even if the answer was no, that was fine, because the point of the group was to learn how to make things and supplement the theoretical knowledge we were getting from the classroom with something practical. We weren't trying to save the world. But it was really gratifying to see people actually use and enjoy the things you make. It gave us all the momentum and drive to keep going and improving. So soon I started more. I started having this gnawing desire, to work on a real app to solve big, meaty problems for lots of people. And my wish was granted when I got a job offer from a startup in New York called Rent a Runway in 2015, right after I graduated. So Rent a Runway is this company that lets women have a subscription to fashion. They can keep 4 items at home and exchange them for new ones whenever they see fit. The mobile team was really small, but everyone seemed pretty cool and, most importantly, passionate about what they were building. So I was on a mission. I was going to join a team and help create this platform for a more sustainable way to consume fashion and democratize access to quality clothing through the sharing economy. I was going to change the world. A little bit. So since day one, I was deep in the weeds of it. I started looking at some failing unit tests, and by the end of day one, I had my first PR. Quickly realized how little I actually knew about iOS development and engineering in general, which was quite humbling, but I had the opportunity to learn while making an impact. In my first year, I was learning exponentially, and soon, with the help of my team, I was thinking less about how to get something done and thinking more about how to get it done well, so that it can last and be built upon. I started to think about design patterns and modular components and architecture and how terribly bloated our MVCs were. And it felt really great when we came up with a solid plan for a refactor that allowed us to delete all those crappy old files we had before and replace them with shiny new ones. But even the shiny new ones became obsolete pretty quickly. This constant cycle of creating and deleting your work makes it hard for you to pinpoint at anything permanent that you've created. like making a chair, for example. Every refactor means that you have to say goodbye to all the time, energy, and effort you put into that work previously. Not only that, but it makes you look at your old work and find it lacking. And don't get me wrong, I love sinking my teeth into cleaning up a code base, and refactoring from Objective-C to Swift is particularly satisfying. But I could feel that I was getting a little detached from my daily work and losing sight of how it mattered in the greater scheme of things. So slowly but surely, my relationship with mobile started to change. And one smaller reason was this constant cycle of creating and destroying your work. But another, more important one, was that the more I started thinking about the broader picture in terms of code and architecture and building things the right way, the more I started thinking about the broader picture in terms of using our app as a tool for women that women use to get dressed, and whether the features we were building and how we were building them were actually aligned to support that goal. One way to answer that question was to look at the raw data of user behavior. So as the team and the company grew, we spent a lot of time figuring out where to add pixels for each of these new features to get that data. And if you're not familiar with pixels, they're these little bits of code that let you track what people are doing in the app. What button they tap on, what page they scroll to, what they search for. You add pixels to understand how a user goes from opening the app to completing a conversion, like signing up or sharing things with friends or making a purchase. For example, when someone adds an item to their bag, you might fire a pixel similar to that one. Once you have this data, you can then create flow funnels of all the steps users have to take from A to B, and then tweak the steps in between to remove any barriers and pain points along their way. One overarching goal for most apps is to increase engagement, and the holy grail is getting people to turn to your app when they're bored. And I am all for data-driven decisions when you use that data to help users reach their goals in better, easier, or more efficient ways. But when you use that data and shift from helping them do what they want to helping them do what you want, that's when things get a little tricky. In 2008, Richard Taylor published a book called Nudge that outlined how to use behavioral psychology to get people to change their habits and actions. The idea was to help people make better decisions for themselves by providing helpful cues that increase intrinsic motivation to reach a goal, because motivation that comes from within you is much more powerful than motivation that comes from the outside, like money or fame. So, for example, in the 1990s, they added this fly sticker to the urinals in the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam to improve cleanliness and reduce spillage. The hypothesis was that men were more likely to aim at a toilet if they saw a target, specifically one they didn't like. And it worked. It reduced spillage by 50%. Similarly, this funny voting trash can for cigarette butts by ballot bins helped reduce cigarette filter litter, which is plastic, by the way, by 20%. On a more serious note, in 2010, the UK behavioral insights team, known as the Nudge Unit, used the principles of the theory to drive behavior change in public policy. They were able to get 6% more people to pay their overdue taxes just by adding this sentence at the top of the letter they sent out. 9 out of 10 people with a debt like yours in your area pay their tax on time. You are in the minority. So clearly this nudge technique can be quite powerful. Mobile apps are great at using this technique as well. One of the most obvious cases are CTAs, otherwise known as buttons. In any app, you'll find at least a primary and a secondary button. The point is to make it very obvious for the user to understand where to tap for the most common use case. And in this case, the nudge is helpful. The visual distinction helps users quickly identify what they most likely want to do. Sometimes, though, these humble buttons can have a bit of a questionable undertone. For example, when going through this checkout flow, this button immediately screams "tap me," even though it's not the checkout button. The actual checkout button happens under the fold. So this is an example of UX design that aims to trick people and manipulate them, because they think that this button will help them progress to the next step. So in this case, the nudge, which should be a value add, can lead to a negative outcome. And there's a term for this type of design called dark UI or dark UX. And while this one is a little sneaky, I started noticing a bunch of similar patterns everywhere. For example, forcing the user into a flow they can't get out of, making it necessary for them to complete it before they can continue with their usual way of using the app. Like this sharing pop-up from ClassPass, or the old Uber rating screen. There's no X or close button, and the normal way of dismissing a modal by tapping outside the screen doesn't work. And even if you force quit the app, you simply have to go through these flows because there's nothing else they let you do. And while this dubious technique will definitely help you rack up some data points, you do have to ask yourself how valid they actually are. We implemented a similar technique at Rent a Runway to get feedback on clothing fit after customers returned their items. And there were many occasions when I just saw our own employees just randomly tapping through the answers just to get out of the experience as fast as possible. So if our own employees were doing that, surely our users were as well. Instead of trapping the users completely, you could show a prominent reminder to do something like this on the home screen, clearly outline the benefits for them for giving the feedback, like better personalization in the future, and provide easy access to this form so they can complete it on their own time. By allowing people to choose when they give you information, you're also ensuring that the data they give you is more accurate, deliberate, and considered. Another example is making it very hard or impossible to do something that should be simple in the fear of churn, like canceling a subscription. Have you noticed how few apps actually let you cancel a subscription inside the app itself? Not only that, but the instructions on how to do it are nowhere to be found. The app provides no hints or suggestions, and usually the user has to call customer service and endure this lengthy marketing conversation before they can cancel. But it's such a simple thing to implement, and as a developer, you probably make that call all the time to test. And this, though, is sometimes a side product from Apple, not allowing companies to offer in-app cancellations on iOS due to Apple's App Store subscription rules. And speaking of Apple, up until iOS 13, Apple itself had this awful UX process to cancel a subscription. It took you 8 steps to do it. And I found that out after I Googled how to because I couldn't figure it out on my own. So by making it so difficult to do something, it makes your users lose trust in your service. If they want to leave, they're going to find a way to do so. And any efforts you take to make it harder will just make it less likely for them to return in the future. Transparency is key to retention. So maybe instead of hiding the cancel option, you can offer a pause option instead. That way you don't completely lose the user and they feel supported in their goals. So little by little, I started seeing all these apps as a little bit suspicious. Started paying attention to these manipulative dark UX tactics, and suddenly I could see them everywhere. And I no longer consider the apps on my phone as truly helpful. I developed this professional deformation where I would download an app purely to dissect its flows and interactions and evaluate whether similar tactics could make sense for our app. And I realized how pervasive mobile apps have become in my own life, and the negative effects my increasing reliance on technology was having on my physical and mental well-being, from how I thought to how I read to how I learned things. And I started to feel a little trapped in this world of screens and upset that I myself was contributing to the problem. And it didn't seem like I was the only one, because a whole bunch of mindfulness and meditation apps started popping up. apps to track your screen time, apps to help you with mental illness, and articles that encourage you to tweak your phone to use it less. Like this interview from Google's former design ethicist, Tristan Harris, which showed you how to turn your phone to grayscale to combat phone addiction. But what was strange about all of this was that while all of these tools were trying to make you use your phone less, they lived on the phone itself. So weren't we just trying to solve problems with the tools that made them? Like, how is that supposed to work? So I started to resent mobile because it seemed like the crux of all of our problems. And I also saw this rant on the future of interaction design and our current vision for it. And the future, as of now, is looking really, really flat. The article is both a criticism towards a screen-based future of tapping and swiping and sliding, and a passionate tribute to all the other things that our hands can do that this screen-based future doesn't account for. Like push and pull and throw and squeeze and pick up a glass and immediately know if it's empty or full. It gives a really interesting definition of a tool. It says a tool is something that addresses a need and amplifies a human capability. It turns what we can do, like hold a hammer, into something we want to do, like bang a nail on a wall to hang a picture. So if I'm working on an app that's supposed to be a tool, and I consciously decide to make the tool harder to use, then it's not a very good tool, is it? So all of these things combined really did a number on me, and I decided to quit my job because I felt like I was just part of perpetuating this problem, and I should go do something more meaningful and purposeful and physical instead, for the real world, not the digital imitation. So I packed my bags, I moved to London, and I started this master's course. Because when I went to their open house, they said something that was right up my alley at this time, which was, we are not interested in irrelevant gadgets that don't bring value to people's lives. Bingo. In the course, there's an overarching belief that your hands can contribute more meaning, which lets you have an advantage over the screen. So the past year has been a whirlwind of scary and exciting new physical making experiences that ultimately helped me establish a friendlier relationship with mobile. Okay, so my course focuses on learning through physical making and experimentation, which is cool. And I thought I'd be good at that because normally I would also learn by making. Sure, I was making stuff on a computer, but the principles seemed the same, right? Wrong. When you program, you have access to almost infinite knowledge and reference materials at the tip of your fingers. But there's no manual telling you what workshop or material to use. Should I use a bandsaw or a hacksaw or a chainsaw? Like, what even is a lathe? It's this thing, by the way. When you prototype in the real world, you can use like paper and cardboard and molding clay and straws and ropes and wires and wood and metal, like anything in the world, literally. And to account for all of these materials and their potential interactions would be impossible, so I failed again and again because I just couldn't Google my questions or look them up on Stack Overflow. I actually had to try them out. So one of the first physical things, So lesson number 1, the world of making software and digital making of all kinds has an incredibly easy access to knowledge and information that significantly speeds up our ability to create. So one of the first things that I made that was physical was this rotating lamp called Shy Lamp. It would light up and rotate when you were far away, but the moment you started getting closer, it would stop and straighten up and slowly turn off. It involved a lot of parts and a lot of laser cutting. And when you laser cut, you make this one digital SVG file, and then expect the laser cutter to cut out a bunch of pieces that match exactly. But that's not necessarily what ends up happening, because the wood might have a grain, or the laser gets stuck, or burns through one side a little bit more than the other. So some of these teeth fit together nicely, Some were way too loose and others just didn't fit at all. And I had absolutely no control over that. So lesson number 2, software is predictable. You are really in control. If you write the same code twice, you can pretty much expect it to behave in exactly the same way, for most cases. So the interaction of that same lamp was driven by an Arduino Uno and some pretty simple code. It was all up and running until it just wasn't. Absolutely nothing changed with the code or the parts. My computer just suddenly stopped seeing the Arduino's port. I restarted it and unplugged it, replugged it, downloaded drivers, anything I could think of. But in the end, I just couldn't figure it out. And neither could my tutors. They were just kind of okay with this remaining an unsolvable mystery. But I wasn't. So lesson number 3, software is solvable. If there's a problem in your code, you can really get down to the nittiest, grittiest bits with a debugger and find that bug. It might be hard and it might take you a long time, but you can rest assured that you can ultimately get down to the bottom of it. So another thing that went wrong with this lamp, clearly I had a lot of problems, was that I kept forgetting about physics. I just wanted to move these blocks on top of one another. But as I was going from sketches to physical manifestation, I realized it's actually quite difficult to make something static while other things rotate in this contained box environment thing. So in order to make my blocks into these beautiful vessels of light that I imagined, they ended up having to have these 5 wooden rods stuck through them with 4 metal pipes in between each level and another little bit to keep the gears in place. So, okay. Lesson number 4, software is possible, even when it's impossible. You can pretty much create anything you want. You can make up your own rules and let your imagination run wild. Another one of my projects was this chair that gave me a whole new meaning for the phrase at scale. Because trying to make a chair at scale immediately would be silly and extremely expensive. We started off by making these small 1 to 5 prototypes so that we could iterate quickly, or so they said. As I was looking through these prototypes and started thinking, I wonder how it would look like if I move this bar a little to the left or change that angle a little or another small alteration like that. All I could think about in that moment was, I really wish there was a copy and paste for the real world. But there isn't. You just have to build it again, which requires double the time and double the resources. So lesson number 5, software is agile and nimble. You can copy and paste code and change a little bit here and a little bit there to very quickly and easily compare 2 alternative solutions side by side and evaluate which one is better. I think you can slowly see where I'm going with this. Ever since I started the course, I kept on hitting these roadblocks that I never had to deal with when I was dealing with software. And as each of these realizations hit me, I started to really appreciate what technology lets us do. But nowhere did this become more apparent than when in March, we went on a research trip to Nairobi in Kenya. We went there for 3 weeks to collaborate with the Nairobi Design Institute to help them come up with solutions for problems related to waste management and sexual and reproductive health. This was my first time in East Africa, and it was very, very different from what I've ever seen before. But the most unexpected thing was the prevalent use of mobile technologies. Everyone has a phone, from the slums to Nairobi Central. And in fact, Kibera or Dandora, 2 of the largest slums in Nairobi, most people don't have a shower or a toilet in their home, but they have a mobile phone. And there's kind of a mini mobile revolution happening in a lot of African countries right now. They kind of skipped computers and went straight to mobile. Mobile money in particular is insanely popular through this service called M-Pesa. And mobile money transactions are actually equivalent to around 50% of Kenya's GDP and growing year over year. I was sitting in this Uber, and we were heading to a tea farm, and I got bored and started talking to my driver about his life, work, phones. And when he started talking about his phone and this M-Pesa app, his face just lit up. He was talking my ears off about how amazing the service was because it allowed him to send money directly to his wife in Uganda, and how easy it was. And how an app that does something really well spreads like wildfire, and that he wants more apps to do more things easily. And if we can make them, we just should as soon as possible. And in fact, at the end of our research trip, many of the groups came up with mobile apps as the best solutions for the problem briefs. One was an app for garbage collectors to divvy up turfs so they didn't have to waste time and gas driving around. And another one was a way for teenagers to discreetly order sexual and reproductive health products, because even bringing up the topic out loud is extremely taboo. In both of these cases, a mobile app was absolutely the perfect solution because it was easy for people to get it, since it lives on the device that is so ubiquitous and essential in people's day-to-day lives. Any physical manifestation and solution would take months or years to develop, manufacture, and distribute, and even more time to upgrade, change, fix, or evolve. So last but not least, lesson number 6 is that mobile apps are insanely convenient because they're easy to distribute, access, and upgrade. Sure, you may have to wait a day or two for Apple to review your binary, but after that, there can be 1 million copies of your product out there in a matter of seconds. So, this is all to say that I was wrong. Mobile apps and mobile phones are not evil, nor the root of all of our problems. They're actually very enabling, powerful, and creative ways to solve problems. And we should be proud and humble that we have the ability to create them. The key, though, is that we have to create and use them responsibly and take ownership and agency of how they fit into our lives. Thank you.